Where do you want your kid to be 10 years from now? What do you want them doing? I've had this conversation with people before. And they'll say, well, I want them to be godly young people. I want them to, be married to a Christian man or woman. I want them to be. I'm like, that's great. Those are wonderful desires for your kids. What are you doing to help them get there?
Well, welcome to the Sound Words Podcast, where it's our goal to help Christians love and live out God's Word. We invited Pastor Tom Zobrist from Liberty Bible Church in Eureka, Illinois, to join us for a conversation today about the Christian family and sports. Welcome to the Sound Words Podcast, Pastor Tom.
Thank you. I appreciate the opportunity to be here today.
Well, we're glad to have you, Tom. And you, of course, are a pastor there in Eureka, Illinois. And you're a father of actually more than one son, but I want to zero in on one son today. That would be your son, Ben, who played Major League Baseball. So we're hoping you could kind of tee up the conversation by letting us know and letting our audience know a little bit about your ministry there at Liberty Bible, as well as your son's trajectory into professional sports.
Yeah, well, I've been here 36 years in just a couple of days. It's the only church I've ever been in, started in a storefront and never left. So we've kind of been entrenched in this little town here in central Illinois for a long time. It's become our home for sure. Because of that, Ben's being raised in a small town. He was never exposed to the best competition and, the scouts and all of those things. So we never set out thinking, oh, well, he's going to be a professional athlete. It just was never in our minds. And a lot of people have asked him about, what's it like to live your dream? He never lived his dream. His dream was to play college basketball. He never got that opportunity, but he was thrust into the world of baseball and without even trying too hard at that. He was a good athlete. His favorite sport was whatever one he was playing at the time. He played soccer, football, basketball, baseball, ran cross country, track. He still holds track records at the school. He was just a good athlete and loved doing everything. And we loved just kind of, hanging out in the community. I coached a little in the community and got to know people. And so it was your classic small town experience. No big fancy baseball trips, scouts, hotels, and all that. It was pretty a Mayberry RFD.
And now, how about Liberty Bible Church? So you've been a pastor did you say a pastor for 36 years, or you've lived there for 36? Okay.
No, I've been the pastor here for 36 years. We started on August 1st, 1988, and that's just a couple of days away from now. And so, yeah, I mean, we've loved becoming part of the community. It's one of those towns, it's a small rural community to where it takes a long time to build up trust with people, and once you have it, they don't want you to leave. They want you to stay because you're part of their family. You've become part of the community, and I think they feel that way about Ben. And when he comes back here, he's just a regular. That's Ben. It's just the kid they knew growing up. And so yeah,
that's neat. Now, Pastor Tom, what did being a baseball dad look like for you as a pastor? And what did being in a devoted church family look like for Ben as an aspiring baseball player?
Well, as a pastor, we tried to be involved as much as we could. Like I said, I coached a little bit. We avoided it getting in the way of church, if at all possible. That was a priority. But, once again, in a small community, we had a baseball committee or board in the town that kind of steered away from church times of even scheduling things. Like they didn't schedule any practices or games on Wednesdays or Sundays because that was church nights for people. And so they had a lot of respect for that. I've kind of seen that disappear in recent years. There's really no respect for church on Sunday mornings, let alone any other time during the week. So that's been a big change. But so because of that, I was able to be involved a lot because we just didn't get in the way of church. We could schedule our baseball life around the church, not the church around the baseball life. And so it was pretty easy to be able to do that. And I enjoyed coaching with the other guys in our church or other guys in the community, getting to know different people. So it was a good opportunity to get out in the town.
Yeah, those sound in some ways like the good old days as you speak about, sports not intruding on Sunday morning and sports not intruding on Wednesday night. Times certainly have changed, and I don't think it's just a larger town like where we sit in Lincoln, Nebraska kind of thing. It's more of a cultural time stamp thing, the times in which we live. And that's sad that it's moved in that direction. I want to ask you some more questions later about what your thoughts are on how things have evolved in the sports world, including intrusion on church and Sundays especially. Before we get there, though, you wrote a book, we know, in the year 2017, and it's titled The Zobrist Family, Look What God Can Do. What moved you to write the book, and what message were you looking to get across in that book?
Well, honestly, my brother-in-law moved me to do that.
Okay.
He thought that would be something that would be really important to tell our story because he knew it. He watched us live it out, and it really is kind of amazing how God took a kid that wasn't really trying from a small town and to take him to that level of success. And if you could see that, there's a picture over my shoulder back there, a World Series picture that's Ben catching a fly ball. That's in 2008. And he was catching a fly ball there in front of the wall, and it just happened to be centered right on the World Series. And he gave me that picture, and he signed it from the backyard to the World Series, Look What God Can Do. And so when I wrote that book, Tyndale was interested in publishing it, and they didn't like the title because they wanted the name Zobrist in the title. And I said, this isn't a story about the Zobrist. It's about what God can do if you just let him do his thing and you not stand in the way of what he's trying to do. And so they changed it to the Zobrist Family, Look What God Can Do. And I was okay with that as long as that statement was in there because Ben always recognized that God was doing something in his life. It wasn't something he was pursuing as much as God was pursuing it along with him. And we kind of went along for the ride, even though we never really wanted that. We actually kind of fought against him wanting to go to college to play baseball. We really wanted him to go to a Bible college and think about ministry first and see where God might lead him in that. And these other doors opened. And so, we ended up going down those pathways. But my wife wasn't as convinced about it. But anyway, that's how the book got going. And it was a fun little project that I did with the help of some people. And so that wasn't something I really aspired to do. I've never really pushed it a whole lot or talked about it a whole lot. It's just fun for our kids to have as a family history. And there's a few people that might be interested in reading it. I give away copies of it. But it really is a great testament to what God can do if you get out of the way, because I was standing in the way for quite a while.
Mm-hmm. Well, and we'll certainly list that book in our description. So listeners, check out the description to this podcast to get a link to Pastor Tom's book. Now, in chapter 2, you wrote a chapter titled 9 Days That Changed My Life.
Yeah.
Can you tell us more about that, what transpired there?
Yeah, that was really amazing as I look back, and because I was an unsaved kid in high school, I was kind of a dropout. Well, I was still in school, but I wasn't a good student, and I was in trouble a lot. And there happened to be an Air Force recruiter at our school that day, and we were standing out in the hallway at lunch, kind of, looking at girls and doing things that dumb high school boys do when they're dumb. And my friend said, I dare you to go sign up for the Air Force. And so I said, oh, well, that sounds like fun. I think I'll go do that. So I went over and signed up for the Air Force. And before I knew it, I was on my way to St. Louis for a physical, and I was signed up to go into the Air Force. And I loved my time in the military, and God used it a great deal in my life. And it's interesting how God can use your stupid decisions to even get you where you need to be, because it was really good for me to get away from my old friends after I got saved, to get away from my old friends and get involved with the Navigators where they really discipled me. But anyway, the 9 days are beginning with my enlistment. I went down there and enlisted in March of 1976. I came home and I scheduled a date with this girl that I thought was really cute. She was the homecoming queen, and she had just broke up with her boyfriend, and so she was kind of out there. And so I thought, it might be fun to talk to her. And so we went out on a date on Friday, our first date, March 19th, 1976. And she was a nice little Catholic girl, and it was Lent, so I took her to a fish place, so she could eat fish on Friday. And then on Monday night, there had been a girl who had been, since their cheerleading camp the summer before, had been witnessing to her. And on Monday night, she accepted Christ on the telephone with her friend. And then on the following day, she came to school and came to my locker. And I really liked her. I told my mom on Saturday after our date, I said, I'm marrying that girl. There's no doubt about that. And she said, well, I just put my faith in Jesus Christ last night, and I want to serve him with my life. And if you're not interested in doing that, I don't really want to go out with you anymore. I'm like, oh, okay. That's kind of like a whoo, right in your face kind of a thing. But, if you'd switch any of those things around, if I would have gone out with her before I signed up for the Air Force, I would not have signed up for the Air Force. And the order of those events where God orchestrated that to where, as a fool, I signed up for the Air Force, went out with her. She led me to Christ. I didn't get saved that day, but it was before I graduated high school. I accepted Christ at a rally, and then went away into the military that summer and got involved with the navigators who discipled me, taught me about scripture memory, personal devotions, all those types of things. Those 9 days, if you'd have switched any of those events around, my life would have gone a completely different pathway. And the way God orchestrated that is always amazing. I look back at that as like, wow, it's in my bad, dumb decisions, he was working to get me where he wanted me to be. So those are the 9 days from my enlistment to around to when she witnessed to me and our first date and everything. That's the lovey part of our book, I guess. I don't know when we.
It's wonderful
when we fell in love.
It's wonderful, and you even highlighted it by that verb, orchestrate. It's God perfectly putting in place every piece of that story in the right order, the right days, with the right people. Again, just testifying to his perfect sovereignty and his divine will. Yeah,
and even the other night, we were at a fellowship after church and talking to some friends, and we were talking about our church app, and I was talking about how it works, and my wife said, well, this does do this, and I said, well, yeah, it does, and I was showing her like how it would work, and she goes, he loves to show me when he's right about something. and my friend that we were sitting with, he goes, but you just remember, she's always got something on you. She led you to Christ. Yeah. I'm like, okay, yeah, right. That's a very humbling thing to think about. Yeah, that's that I live with the person that led me to Christ, and I get the opportunity to spend my life with her. That's a great privilege that God's allowed me to have.
Yeah, that's awesome. Yeah, that's wonderful. Tom, if I could, I'd love to now meander back to that question I kind of alluded to earlier about the present day. So you used the word Mayberry-esque to describe, raising your family there in Illinois, central Illinois, in a smaller town, and sports maybe not being as intrusive then in that context as they are today. How would you counsel or minister to somebody in your church or that's just tuning in who's walking that line between wanting to be a faithful church member, be a vibrant member of a local healthy church, but at the same time allow their kids to play in sports leagues of various types? How do you help them thread that needle, walk that line?
Well, they have to make some hard decisions. You can't really have it both ways. You can't be committed to the local church and commit to some of these club teams that require hours and hours of practice and days of travel, and then have your kids grow up thinking that church is a priority or God's a priority, because he really hasn't. You've exposed them to an idol in their childhood, to where now they're worshiping an idol, their abilities or their sport that they're involved in, their future, their hopes, their dreams, whatever. Those hopes and dreams replace God's plan for their life. And maybe that's not God's plan for their life. So what I try to help people do is think 10 years from now. Where do you want your kid to be 10 years from now? What do you want them doing? I've had this conversation with people before. And they'll say, well, I want them to be godly young people. I want them to, be married to a Christian man or woman. I want them to be. I'm like, that's great. Those are wonderful desires for your kids. What are you doing to help them get there? I mean, are you is all this sports going to help them get there? I mean, do they have to have that much sports to really enjoy their childhood, especially in one sport? You know, like I mentioned with Ben, he was going from sport to sport to sport. Every 8 weeks, he was going to something different. And it was never a lot of one thing. It was just different things that were always in the community, never a lot of travel, never crazy hours of practice. And I've watched them take positions on teams that are 2 hours away from us that require travel. They're 2 and 4 days a week to travel, weekend games, traveling around the Midwest, doing homework in the car, completely disconnected from the family. And you wonder, what's the long-term effect going to be on these kids when they get to the end of that commitment and find out that there's nothing really there? It was just a game for a moment. And is there a better focus they could have and still do the game, still enjoy it on the side without having to commit to something that becomes another God in their life, that's taking up time away from the God in their life? And so it's hard to communicate that, because every parent's living this. It's like, my kid's the next one. You don't understand. I mean, I know there's a lot of good kids, but mine's just a little different. He's a little bit better than the next one, and it's like, if it's God's will, you can't stop it. If it's not God's will, you might break your kid trying to get there. So just help your kid to focus on, what does God want for me right now? What is going to be my best benefit right now in my life? How can I find God's will for my life today and in the future? And how can I get there? What's going to be the best benefit? Is studying the Bible going to benefit me? Is memorizing some scripture every week going to benefit me? Is playing the little sports? Yeah, I think there's so many advantages to sport. I love them. I love sports. I love to play them. I love to watch them now. I love to watch kids. I love to watch high school sports. But I've seen even high school athletes they're good in this sport, and then they go on to their next season in this sport in the school, but they're still on a club team in the last sport. So they'll have a game at 7:00 at night, and that game gets over at 8, and their parents pick them up, and they have to change clothes, and they go to another practice for a club team of a whole different sport. I'm like, what the world is going on here? When do you do your homework? When do you live your life, normally? And it's gotten out of control for a lot of people.
Yeah, I like your comment about idolatry in sports. As many have said, our hearts are idol factories if we let them run loose. And sports, both for the player and for the parent, as you're pointing out, can be an idol. Now, can you give me an example of either in your own life or a life you've seen of a parent who has managed this well? What kinds of practical barriers or rules or guidelines do they set up for their family where you say, okay, that's a godly practical practice there?
Yeah, I've seen a few people in our church that have set up some boundaries. One family in particular that I'm thinking of told their kids, you could pick one sport a year. You can pick one season a year that you can give yourself to. That's all we're doing as a family. You can't play season after season after season after season. If you want to play basketball, great, play basketball. If you want to play baseball, great, play baseball. But we're not going to do every season. I've seen other families say, we're going to do that, but we're not going to get on the most extreme team that's going to cause us to be traveling every weekend and cost us thousands of dollars. I mean, they spend thousands of dollars on these seasons, but they're going for the scholarship. And I said, they already have one. All that money you're spending right now, put it in the bank, and they'll have that scholarship when they get to college. And so some have limited the number of sports. Some have limited the extent of how much they're going to be committed to that sport. Some kids do it on their own when they get to high school. They're like, I'm not going to do that because I want to get a job, for part of the year, and I don't want to be doing, multiple sports all the time. So some have managed it well, and some not so well. But there are ways you can enjoy it and not let it become an idol. And I think the main thing in that is, if we keep God as a priority and we pray and ask for wisdom, I think somewhere in the Bible it says, if you ask, you can have wisdom. And I think if parents would ask for that wisdom about how to manage all the opportunities, I think God would help them to have that wisdom and still have their kids know, hey, God's number one in my life, and I'm not going to compromise that for anything. And there were times when Ben had to miss games because he went to church first. He played in an American Legion team in high school, and they played doubleheaders every Sunday, but they usually started before church was out, like 1 o'clock, and we weren't done till noon, and he couldn't get there for the first game. So he didn't play the first game. That's okay. You don't have to play every game. You can play the second game. And coaches worked with that. Like I say, if a kid's good enough, the coach will work with it. But you got to take a stand somewhere and say that this is a priority for our family. We want to be involved in the game, but if you're going to require us to miss church every week, we can't do that. That's something that we know that God doesn't want us to forsake the body for months at a time. And I've had people say to me, hey, we're starting in the club season now, so probably won't see us for 3 or 4 months, and I'm like, okay, that's not a good idea. That's not a good plan for your family.
Yeah. So we've spoken a little bit to the church concern, like that last example you mentioned, we'll be gone for 3 to 4 months. You've already mentioned that you do enjoy sports and attending, watching, coaching, those sorts of things. Are there ways in which you've seen that sports, being involved with sports, can be a helpful platform for parents with their children to actually teach and instill Christian values and principles?
Oh, yeah. I know that in my experience in raising an athlete, really 5 athletes. I had 5 kids that were very athletic and played sports in high school, is that you learn more from losing than you learn from winning in sports. And sports are all about character building. If you have the right kind of coaches that are teaching character qualities to their kids, if you are learning to be a team player, and my kids ran cross country, not all of them, but a few of them did. And the idea that cross country is a team sport never entered my mind. I never did cross country. I ran as an adult for a number of years, but as far as like, you're a team, you run together as a team, and to watch how they did that and how they built that in their kids, I mean, it's one of the most popular sports in our school because they've ingrained in our students that this is a team sport, you're all part of it, doesn't matter if you're in the top 7 or not, and that they go to meets together, they support one another, those are things you can't learn in a lot of avenues in life, but you can learn it in the sports venue where you learn your role, you play your role, and your role's important, whether it's the one that's getting the headlines or not. And I think that's real important to learn. And Ben, even if you asked Ben, if you could get him on your podcast sometime, you asked him if he was the best person on or player on every team he was on, he will say, and I've heard him say this, and it's probably true because I know these teams, I've never been the best guy on any team I've played on. And that's probably true. But he was a great role player, and he knew his place, and it made him very humble in his approach to the game. And it's funny, he never looked for headlines. He never wanted to be the best. He didn't want to be the guy standing in front of the cameras. He was always the guy that just came in. He loved to play. Hey, you guys go take care of the reporters. I'm going to go get cleaned up and work out and go home. But yet God still thrust him on that stage where he had an opportunity to talk about his faith and share the gospel with players. And he still has a fruitful ministry among players that are believers. So there's some guys he's led to Christ in the past. And those are all opportunities that come up in sports. But how do you do that? How do you say God's a priority in my life when you've never at one moment made him a priority in your life? But yet as Christians, we say we believe that.
Well, that's awesome, Tom, and thank you for sharing that with us. It's apparent that God has guided you both as a parent, as a pastor, and instilling these values in your family. God has blessed it and blessed your ministry as well. So thank you for sharing with us today. We appreciate you.
My pleasure.
Yeah, we're appreciative of you, Tom, your ministry, and just the example you set for many men, many pastors, many dads who are raising boys and girls who love to play sports. Well, the final word, as always, on the Sound Words podcast goes to God and His Word, where Paul says to Timothy in 2 Timothy 1:13, retain the standard of sound words, which you have heard from me in the faith and love which are in Christ Jesus.
Thanks for listening.